IVM.
The marketing space is one of the most ever-evolving practices in our world today. It's a space where the need to constantly learn, upgrade, and get hands-on with the execution is paramount. So while educational institutions have for the longest time drilled in the basics, many marketers are seeing the need to build skill boosters for both fresh graduates as well as seasoned professionals who are in need to upskill in the midst of their careers. One such marketer who's built a very interesting company, Craftshala, around this space is Varun Sethia. And I thought it would be interesting to get him on the show to discuss how he's building this out, as well as how he's seeing this focus on upskilling, scaling up further in the market today, as well as going ahead. That's what's ahead in this episode of Advertising is Dead. I'm Varun Duggirala, the co-founder and content chief at The Glitch. Be right back with Advertising is Dead.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you haven't been following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. Their support is much appreciated. Before I tell you about some of the shows that we have for you this week, I really wanted to really point out the incredible efforts of our host and our team. We've been able to maintain most of our production schedule in this lockdown, which is going into 4 months now. And I couldn't be happier with the fact that our hosts and team have been able to just get all of this stuff out so incredibly well. So I just really wanted to call them out for that and thank them for their support in this time. And since I spent so much time talking about that, and I want to get you out of here quickly, let me give you a quick update on a few shows that you should check out this week. On Siders, we had Amish Tripathi, really interesting discussion, both of them dive deep into history. Monty Panesar was on Edges and Sledges, another really cool show. On Advertising is Dead, Tanmay Bhatt showed up. That was a cool episode. Malini Agarwal, also probably better known as Miss Malini, showed up on Absolutely Right. It's just been an absolutely gangbusters week in terms of the kind of guests we've had and the conversations we've had on the network. Please do check some stuff out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Welcome back to Advertising is Dead with Varun. Hi, Varun.
Hi, Varun. How are you?
Yeah, this is going to be that interesting part in the entire podcast where I'm going to keep referring to you as Varun and you. I think people at some point will start getting confused as to which Varun is speaking. But talking about you, I thought we'll start off before we get to Craftshala and what you do. I thought I'll just start off because I found your journey very interesting in terms of how you came about setting up Craftshala. So I thought that'd be a great place to start. How did you start off in the space and how did you end up setting up Craftshala?
Yeah, fair enough. So right off the blocks, I should tell you that I'm very uncomfortable calling you Varun. So I'm going to try and avoid it. There've been 4 Varuns in my class consistently over many years. And it's just one of those things where we used to sort of refer to each other by their surnames, which was usually easier. But more to the question that you'd asked. So I had a very conventional path into marketing, which starts with engineering. So I went to an engineering college, then figured very quickly that wasn't my gig. Went to an MBA, figured very quickly that marketing is what I'm interested in. And so I joined a marketing firm immediately after business school. So I worked for this company called Nestle, which makes amongst other things, chocolates and milk powder and noodles. So my first full-time role in marketing was on Maggi sauces, which I worked on for about 18 months. Then I switched over to Maggi noodles, where I spent another couple of years. And then, having spent about 4 years in a corporate job, I quit to start a company. It was technically my first entrepreneurial stint, but practically, I guess I'd known for a long time that I'm going to do this at some point in my career. There were some entrepreneurial ambitions even during undergrad. And so by the time I started this thing, there was a reasonable measure of confidence, having worked on fairly large brands in marketing, having spent a lot of time just sort of building up towards what I was going to do. I spent 6 months in the final part of my time at Nestle thinking about what I want to do. And so I was quite confident of what I was building. I had all the knowledge in the world when it came to building product innovations that did exist at that point, having been in Nestle. And all that confidence lasted for exactly 24 hours. And, the first day I woke up, I was shit scared. And that's when it started to sort of hit me of how much I'd sort of bitten on to this time. My first venture was in education. It wasn't Craftshalla. It lasted all of 10 months before I shut down that product and that company. And then I guess I was, what's the right word for it? Unemployed, I think should cover it for some time after that. I think that one of the things I realized, there were many failures or there were many learnings that came out of that first failed venture. But I think one of the bigger ones was the fact that what I learned about myself was that I found it easier to be disciplined and driven when I felt more passionate about a topic, when I felt more passionate about a project. The first venture that I picked up was in the education space, but it wasn't something that I felt very deeply about. It was in that competitive exam space, which is when all the big businesses have really come about. And, I decided on that space largely because it was the biggest space and because, I had an interesting idea around that. But I felt no passion for it. When I did consumer work, I used to meet these 16-year-old kids. And instead of talking about my product, I felt like counseling them that, look, you don't have to worry too much about this. This is not going to matter in the end. There are many paths to success and so on and so forth. But I was constrained by what I was selling. So in that sense, the first time that product failed, I was ready to give up. I think I gave up long before the product actually failed in my head. And that's the reverse of what I guess it takes in entrepreneurship to succeed. So my big learning, I think one of the big learnings was definitely that I want to pursue projects which were of interest. The harder problem was to find out what was of interest and then marry. Yeah, that's always tricky and marry it to something that actually has potential as well. So I thought, the last time I started with a really good plan. This time, let me not start with a plan. Let me just do things that are coming up that are interesting to me. And one of the things that was interesting was the concept of Craftshalla. And that really sort of came about because I thought that most of what I learned in sales and marketing had happened while I was working. And so I thought that if I can sort of make real world marketing and sales interesting to an audience which is still in the academic side of their life, then I would present a true picture to them because I think that it's a fantastic field to get into. And B, like they would pick up stuff in the class, they would pick up stuff which would be pre-doing their job, which would be amazing. So we started Craftshalla as this boot camp, which was about 6 weeks long, delivered online, and initially opened to only a few business school campuses. So we initially opened it up to the bigger IMs and ISB and FMS and SPGen and all of that, and just to sort of test out if the idea had any merit or any potential. And since then we've sort of expanded it to larger audiences, working professionals, and soon people who are going to be graduating from undergrad as well.
What I found interesting about your model, right, and I've had I've had this focus on looking at how education's been evolving because I generally find that of interest because, like you said, I went through engineering as well. I didn't like it at all. Went through the usual rounds, and I always felt that while you learn a lot of things in college, a lot of it doesn't necessarily apply in terms of skill sets, right? You learn the theory of many things, but in terms of actual skill sets, and especially something like marketing where the whole space is kind of evolving on a day-to-day basis now, not necessarily even like a year-to-year basis. When you kind of started off, what did you see as the kind of gaps that you immediately had to were able to kind of bring in to fill?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the first piece was about making marketing interesting and making sales interesting to people. I think that the concept to young people who are, let's say, in their early to mid 20s, who have not yet started working, seems a little abstract and a little removed from reality. And so I think the first piece was just getting people working on problems that were exciting by design. And so one of the things that we really sort of deployed was picking up things around people that people were fundamentally interested in, and putting a marketing lens to it. So, for instance, a couple of months ago, we did this session, and then we wrote a piece as well on the Craftshalla website, which was around the Delhi elections. Actually, we did it a few months ago now that I remember, which was simply about looking at the the elections not from a political lens, but just simply from a marketing lens in terms of what were the two main political parties who were involved in that election trying to do from a communication and a messaging sense. And that obviously, is interesting to anyone who's interested in politics and is sort of is going to sort of spend some time, thinking about why what happened did happen. And similarly, we did a piece on Bollywood, essentially, where we wanted to explain the concept of brand essence. But, instead of, picking up a brand of detergent, we thought, why don't we look at the essence of the three biggest film stars in Bollywood who have been around for the last 30 plus years and try and map out why their returns have turned out the way they have turned out, which I think the brand essence has a lot to sort of explain on, right? So in that sense, the first thing was about making things interesting about whether people were interested in cricket, in Bollywood, in politics, in sport, in stories. We would just do that. I think the other piece was about understanding that people are not going to learn marketing or sales by listening to it. We can use sessions to inspire, to put people in the right direction, to open up their minds, but to really learn the craft, they had to do it themselves. And to accelerate their learning, they had to do it under the guidance of practitioners who were very experienced, who could, interpret their learnings in a way such that you pick up things very quickly and you really understand the context of what you've learned. And that's also, by the way, that we came up with the name Craftshalla. It was meant to demonstrate that craft can only be built if you're doing stuff under the guidance of practitioners. And that's something which has always, been central to whatever we have built.
So would you then say the system that you kind of follow is more iterative in that sense, in terms of, because it has to be, right? I mean, especially also because you've segmented it into I would say, two broad categories of students. If you call them students, people who've just, like, let's say, finishing off B school, or people who've already been working for a while. And I'm guessing that you do. Would you say iterative is the way you do it?
Yeah, I think iteration is a big part of what we do. I think that learning from practitioners directly is a big part of what we do. Like, I don't think we've ever built a module ever where the person involved in building the module has not had substantial experience in sort of doing what they do. Like, for instance, if you were to build something on media planning, then you want to work with people who have run media campaigns, which is basically putting money on different platforms in different contexts. So there are people who've run 50 crore campaigns and there are people who've run 50,000 rupee campaigns, and the context is completely different. So in that sense, you want to make sure that you get the practitioners' perspectives in. And then I think that depending on the context of the background of the students, then we figure out what has to go in. And our segmentation is at 3 levels. So there are those who, at the very base level, there are those who have no idea about marketing, who haven't worked in marketing, but might be interested in it. So someone who might still be in undergrad or has graduated maybe a couple of years ago. So that's one audience. The other audience is those who are in business school. And so therefore, within business school, sales and marketing is typically anywhere between 25 to 40 to 50% of the audience. And so that's an audience which is slightly more understanding of the terms. They're also getting exposed to theory of sales and marketing. And then there is the piece of working professionals and those who've been working in these functions for a few years and want to upskill and build upon their thing. So the segmentation, I think, is and the kind of programs we build are very different for all 3 of these audiences.
What I also noticed is the fact that you obviously have a lot of large scale companies who are working with you, right? I mean, I've seen names of everybody from Nestle to Marico, P&G, Unilever, etc., who are businesses that you work with. When you talk to them to kind of fine tune what the courses that you, or rather what you train people on have to be about, what have you learned in terms of what does modern marketing kind of demand of their marketers, right? I mean, that's really, I would say that at some point, the base on which you're building the entire piece on is the fact that, okay, this is the modern ask and people need to be able to learn all these aspects. So what would you say those points are?
Yeah, so I think that primarily the work that we do is with marketers early in their journey. So people who are just about to start marketing or have started marketing recently. And the first port of action is to build out the strategic aspect of marketing. So for instance, let's say that you were to ask the question, you're working on a product or a brand and you realize that your market share is falling. Now, the amateur answer to that is to suggest that, why don't we try Instagram stories because that's been doing really well.
Yeah.
TikTok has been growing really well. Why don't we look at new platforms? Why don't we look at this creative format? And so it's very solution forward thinking. And a large part of our job is to make sure that people develop a very structured way of solving problems. And so what that would mean essentially is, all right, so your market share is going down. That can fundamentally mean that there are three possibilities. A, you are your growth is decelerating even as the category is doing okay or is increasing, or the fact is that both you and the category are growing, but the category is just sort of growing at a faster pace, which category would mean your competitors essentially. Or the fact is that both you and your competitors are actually degrowing and you're just sort of degrowing at a faster rate. Now, when you start to break down this into this and then you further break down into the problems, and you realize that, actually, what is happening at the end of the day is that perhaps we are growing, our competitors are growing faster, and the reason they're growing faster is because they have a product stream or they have a distribution angle that we haven't explored at all. And that is or perhaps our portfolio itself is not strong enough. Once you're able to sort of identify where the exact gap is, then you start to build out the solutions there. And in that sense, I think that if at least in what I have seen, I think that framing the right problem is maybe 70% of the challenge. The 30% is relatively easy because, you'll get it right the first time or you'll get it right the second time. You'll get it right the third time. It'll happen because for a fact that this is where you're going wrong. Whereas if you don't know where you're going wrong, then you keep sort of trying different things and you don't yourself have the confidence to keep pursuing something. So in that sense, I think one of the starting spaces is around just the identification of where the opportunity for growth lies in is a big part of it. Then when it comes to large companies, large FMCG companies or large consumer goods companies, they have a history of incredible marketing capability in-house. But what happens is that there is a space to identify more digital tools for them that people can use across the marketing funnel, across the consumer engagement funnel. And so one of the beliefs that we have internally within Craftshella is that while marketing is evolving fairly quickly, like everything else, there are a lot of principles which sort of don't change, but your capabilities are evolving very rapidly because of the tools and because of the data that is available. And because your tools are changing, therefore, if you understand that change, then you understand what more you can do today that you weren't able to do a few years ago. And so in that sense, just staying up to date with the tools is another aspect of it because it just expands your capabilities in a substantial way.
That must be a big ask on your end as well, because I think that anybody who's in marketing now realizes that the tools you're using today keep getting updated and then the newer opportunities across platforms come so often. And I guess at some point it's about you must also look at balancing that, right? Because no one can kind of span across everything because that will create a lot of confusion, but kind of just evolve the marketing mindset in that sense rather than individual pieces. Will that be a fair point to make?
I think that in reality, there are many paths to success. And so what we've seen is that different brands in the same category can follow completely different approaches and achieve a fair amount of success. And so it's very context dependent, in which case, the tools that necessarily people are using, tools your competitors are using, either in your or on others, don't necessarily need to be copied. but fundamental understanding of data still should be there. So for instance, it doesn't matter whether you're using Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, at the end of the day, you should be able to know what you're looking at and make intelligent conclusions from it. And then obviously, if one tool has a slightly higher capability, the other one will have it in a few months as well. And so in that sense, it's really about the craft is in making intelligent conclusions from it, conclusions which are, let's say, data backed not just by one source, but by multiple sources. So you can triangulate that information, and just a level of intellectual humility to say, look, this is what we think it is, 80% where we should be right, but 20% there still might be other hypotheses there, which takes you back to that first hypothesis setting scenario where you were trying to determine what could potentially be all the things that are happening there, and then which are the most likely. So in that sense, I think it's the comfort that marketers, I think they get it over a period of time, is when they start to understand that there are many ways to get to the same result. You don't have to necessarily follow someone else's path.
What I think would be interesting to also know is that from the time when you were working in marketing at Nestle to now, how have you seen how you look at marketing kind of changed, right? Because on one end, obviously there was, I wouldn't say that you were a lot more hands-on then, but now obviously you need to be a lot more hands-on in a very different sense to kind of understand how it's expanding. What do you feel that you've learned from the time you moved to this side of the whole spectrum?
I think Nestle was great to understand the concepts in marketing, but the concept really landed when I sort of went out. So, one of the projects that I was working on when I was in that phase of, shutdown first venture, Craftshalla has not yet taken off, is I was working on a dating app. And so we just launched this version, and we wanted to get some initial users. So we were doing an event, and I had a pamphlet with me that I was distributing in Cyber Hub in Gurgaon. And, as I was distributing pamphlets, I was iterating in terms of how do I get people to look at the pamphlet, right? And so just, that aspect of making sure that I can build eye contact, that I can build credibility before they'll even pay attention to my pamphlet. I think it really landed how much trust matters before any conversation can happen. Similarly, there are some people who would not take a pamphlet from a random person at all, no matter what, no matter who's distributing it. Brad Pitt could be distributing it, and it'll still not matter because it's at the end of the day a pamphlet and it's an interruption. So in that sense, just selling to the convertible sort of really landed when I was doing these things. I think that one of the challenges that happen in marketing is that the learning, at least on big brands, I think the learning happens far too slowly. We would launch a 50 crore campaign or a 10 crore campaign and sales would go up. But did the sales go up because we got the campaign right? Or did the sales go up because everyone knows Maggi, they saw an ad on TV and they were just sort of, they remembered that, I'm stocked up on Maggi. And so in that sense, it's not an easy question to answer of whether you've really sort of hit the nail on the head or whether you're just, getting it because of the media monies that you've presented. So in that sense, running a 10,000 or 1,000 rupee campaign on Facebook was far more instructive because you could run A/B tests and you could sort of really see what was working and why it was working. So in that sense, I think I picked up a lot of the concepts in my time there. And I think that they've held me in good stead because when in doubt, you can always go back to them. But they really land once you fail, once you get good feedback. And that's always, I think, the challenge for marketers. How do you get good feedback when you're working on large brands is not an easy question. And that's also why, and this, by the way, throws up an interesting way. So for example, if you look at compensation of early brand managers, let's say a 1-year brand manager, it is the same as the compensation for a brand manager who spent 0 years. And the reason is, yes, you've picked up something, but you haven't really picked up anything to sort of speak about. You're still being hired on potential. Whereas, you take another area like sales or in another area like coding, a 1-year salesperson is far more valuable than someone who's not done sales because they've really gotten feedback immediately on what is working, what is not working. So that's always, I think, the challenge for people who are working on large brands, that how do they accelerate the process? How do they get that feedback in?
And I think if you go around this entire piece, also considering the way the whole education space itself is getting disrupted right now, right? I mean, if you look at how learning is happening, I would say even from a school level, and I have a daughter who was supposed to start nursery sometime in August, and we're seeing that disruption start from day one in that sense. To anybody who and then obviously kind of scaling up as it goes along, while what you would be doing initially would have involved a mixed format of things. Has it changed your outlook in terms of how education itself is going to function, in terms of how you go about your process, and where do you kind of see that going?
I think education in India is following global trends. I think the innovation in the K-12 space is probably the least because of the way our laws are structured. Whereas, if you look at the K-12 innovations happening across the world, there's just some fantastic experiments being done, and some of them are hopefully going to lead to results. But I think that in India, we're just at the start of that cycle in innovation in the K-12, and K-12 is basically class 1st to 12. Whereas when we look at higher education, I think the Indian innovation that is happening here is not very far off. I think we're building a lot of interesting solutions here that have the potential to sort of not just be applicable here in India, but across the world. Mm-hmm. From Tavshala's own journey, I can tell you that over the last few years there's a lot of things that have evolved. So I think the fact that you have to create a solution which is practitioner driven, the fact that you need real practitioners involved in higher education, I think that has always been there. But just this aspect of the social aspect of learning for adults, I think that has really sort of evolved a lot. I think that it used to be the case that you could say that an online course, an online program is not going to be as immersive as a physical program. And I think while the gap is there, I think that gap is shortening very, very rapidly. And it has shortened substantially since COVID as well, because you're just being forced to sort of build more platforms for people to interact with each other. I'll just give you one example here. Yeah. When we started our programs, it used to be a huge believers in one-to-one interactions, that people should be given feedback on their specific work. And while that's really important, I think that it's even more important to use the group level to motivate people to do better. I think it works really well in working professionals in particular, where your motivation stems from your fundamental belief that you want to come across as someone who's smart, who's driven, who's professional. And in that sense, just that group aspect, that motivation to do better, the challenge that you get from people who are from different backgrounds is very, very important. So now we just think in terms of groups, like groups of 3, this is what's applicable. Groups of 15, this is what's applicable. Group of 50, this is what is applicable. So in that sense, that understanding of how you can encourage people to sort of really learn as a group and not so much as as an individual, I think that has gone up substantially. I think the other thing that's evolved is, for us at least, is the feedback loop. So just I think there's a lot of data that you get on candidates, and the candidates also get on themselves. And so the way a candidate uses that is very helpful. So a good example in, let's say, a different space, in a competitive exam space, is when we used to prepare for physics, right? We would say that, okay, I'm weak in physics, I'm strong in physics, and I need to go up, right? But today the way students prepare is, look, I'm good in gravitational theory, but I'm not so good in wave motion. So what is happening is that I'm spending too much time worrying about the wave motion in the paper, and I'm losing marks on the others. And the reason I know that is because I have data on this. So I spent a disproportionate time trying to solve a question on wave motion when I could have easily scored, right? And so when you get that specific data, then obviously that your learning is much faster. Now you can also expand it at an aggregate level, and this is what we do. So what we see is, look, we've taught our candidates 16 topics, and out of these 16 topics, there are 3 that everyone has really aced. But then there are these other 5 that most of them have struggled with, which then feeds back into our project charters, our content, our sessions. And so that really sort of triggers the improvement process. So I think that you can't get in the offline setup. And so in that sense, I think online programs, I think on some aspects are already much better than offline programs. And on the social aspect, I think are progressively getting better.
Also, then gives you that scale. Also, scalability, not in the sense from a business side, right? It also gives you the ability to reach so many more people who might not be able to kind of travel to a certain spot to do it, and kind of make it available across the board as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's always been the promise of online education, that it uplifts people who would previously not have gotten access to it. And at Craftshalla, I think that's always been the motivating thing for us. Like we started in the premier B schools, and Ishu and I, who started it, we used to sometimes wonder, look, are we just uplifting the uplifted here? What are we really doing about it? But we had to stay disciplined, because I think that as a business, you have to take a call to start someplace. And so you start in the places where you've come from, where at least you know the market a little better. But as an online education player, I think it just gives you enormous capabilities to inspire someone who you didn't think would be there. We recently got someone on Craftshalla Live, which is the public sessions, who was essentially a school principal, and said that, look, I've been doing this for the last I've been in teaching for the last 20 years, and now I'm a principal. And now I'm thinking, this is not the career for me. So now I'm inspired to start working on marketing. I mean, it's a 42-year-old person. You didn't think that they would not fall under any of our segments, any of our super consumer deep dives. But that's the real impact of it.
A large part of the audience that listens to this, right, are people who are, let's say, in college or would have just started their careers. It would pretty much be, I would say my target audience would pretty much be the people who would reach out to you guys. What are the first set of things you kind of run them by in the sense that to be a marketer in today's world, just to kind of set mindset when they start off, what would those things be? Because their questions many times are pretty simple, but maybe sounding simple to us, but to them they're trying to figure out how they can stay relevant, how they can grow, etc., and how they can kick off their careers, and especially at a time like this. What would those points be?
Yeah, so if I were to frame the question slightly differently, I think that one variation of this is, look, if the tools are changing so quickly, what do we really build upon? Like, how do we build skills that are going to be relevant in 5 years? Last week TikTok was available, today it's not. So, like, what happens? Should we have been preparing for it? Should we not have been preparing for it? I think that Jeff Bezos had this very interesting letter to shareholders almost 2 decades ago, and he said that, look, technology is going to keep changing, but what we're going to do is we're going to build Amazon on the core principles that don't change over the period of time. So what I cannot predict is which technology will be powering our distribution system, but what I can predict is that customers would always want the cheapest prices, the highest variety, and the fastest delivery. And so whatever it takes for me to get to that, that's what Amazon's going to pursue. I think a career, when you think about a career and you're starting out, you want to build skills which are going to give you those kind of optionalities and are not going to go out of fashion. So when it comes to a marketing function, what kind of skill sets do you want to build in? What is not going to go out of fashion, for instance, is this thought of just, articulating the problem or the opportunity really well. So just that ability to break down problems is going to be hugely useful today and 10 years from now. Similarly, the ability to empathize with the users and to just sort of see people for who they are and not put in your own view on them. I think that just that pure user centricity and empathy I think that is going to be hugely useful. I think the ability to write and design are hugely useful. And you don't need to do both. I mean, but at least one of them. I think, just to give a contrast, 10 years ago, we could run an ad on IPL and that would reach a large percentage of our audience. But today, what happens is an IPL, and I would include, let's say, the TV soaps, and you could get reach with very few creatives. Today, the number of creatives that you need to build are just so high. You have to build, even on large brand, 100,000, tens of thousands is what some people say. So in that sense, if you are not fundamentally good at writing or at design, one of those, maybe both, then it becomes difficult for you to really sort of churn out good work, and that sort of gets in the way. So in that sense, I don't think enough people talk about writing as a way to get good at marketing. I think that if you can write copy, it's amazing how far you can go forward with it. And so what I would do is I would build the skills that as if I'm in that position, I would build a skill that I broadly like amongst these, but then I would really sort of go deep into it. So I wouldn't worry about, am I writing for Medium or am I writing for Twitter or am I writing for LinkedIn? I just, do whatever is interesting to me, whatever comes naturally for me, and do it in a deep way.
As you get towards the end of every episode, right, I start this segment off, which is called Humans of Advertising. It's like I say every week, it's never rapid, and that is the whole point, is to be opposite of a rapid fire. So if for people that who know you well as well, what would that one thing be that you are a consumer of, or which you obsess over, which they would be surprised to know that you actually do obsess or consume that piece? What would that be?
So that people don't know that I'm obsessed about?
Yeah. For someone who's like met you professionally or around, like, really, this is something which you like doing, or this is something which you like consuming, that kind of a thing.
I think as a vice, I would say that that I'm a little bit of a sucker for consumer tech products. Like,
aren't we all?
Like, I don't demonstrate it. You won't really sort of see it very easily. Or if you really pay close attention to it, I know, I'd be particularly proud of the gadgets that I own, and I spend far too much than I need to. So yeah, I think that would probably be the case.
What can you put together in an instant?
I think inspiration. I think I haven't learned any real world skills. If you put me in a forest, I'd probably die sooner than most people. But if I can just have a few people who are needing a purpose, I think I might be able to survive.
Perfect. What is your point of consumption? Are you is it shows? Is it books? Is it podcasts? Any recommendations that you would have amongst any of these?
So I'm a sucker for stories in general, and I think I like visual stories. I think trump in general text-based stories, so less of books these days. I think that I enjoy conversations a fair bit. So if someone hasn't gone through the, so most movies are built today around the classic Avengers kind of, lots of action and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I think you can build a lot of interesting stories just around conversations as well. So if anyone hasn't discovered the Before series, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight, I think,
series,
I think that'd be interesting.
And to kind of wrap this up, why do you think advertising will not die? Or rather, advertising and marketing, why will they not die?
I think that advertising and marketing is just going to become more relevant. I think that what is happening, the way I look at the world, is there is going to be great demand for people who build products and people who sell products. And a lot of the in-between tasks are going to get automated. So, we needed a lot of lawyers up until 5 years ago, but we don't need as many today. But we're still producing a lot. That's a different aspect. And we didn't need as many admin people. But we still need as many sales and marketing folks, broadly speaking, because we'll continue to build new things and we'll continue to have a need for selling those things. So if you can do either of those things really well in a given domain, that you're going to be in super demand through and through.
Look, thank you so much for doing this, Varun. See, you've not had to call me by name throughout this whole thing, so we didn't have to go through that except for that one time. And I think that's a good way to kind of end this. And thank you so much for coming on Advertising is Dead.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
Do you have a night routine? Well, everyone has one. And the to-do list usually looks like this. Brush your teeth, set that alarm, get into your pajamas, and switch off those screens. But here's one more to add to that list. Tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast for a dose of positive action and tips on how to build powerful mindsets. Episodes out every Monday on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you tune into podcasts.
रिश्ते में तो हम तुम्हारे पॉडकास्ट लगते हैं. नाम है फुटबॉल शुटबॉल.
Presenting Football Shortball, a show about three friends discussing our favorite game over a beer. Sometimes 3, maybe even 5. Hi, I'm Shiva, and with me are my two sidekicks, Gaurav Sapre and Karthik Iyer.
Sidekick? You mean like Batman's Robin or Van Persie Robin?
No, I mean like Alexis Sanchez, but with a little more skill than just playing the piano.
Ha! Just shows how the best players at Arsenal are mere bench warmers at United.
Oh, thank you, Iyer. But you're a Fulham supporter, so whenever you say anything to support me, I question my beliefs.
Just like how Griezmann would say, एक बार मैंने जो decision ले लिया, तो मैं अपने आप की भी नहीं सुनता.
Banter aside, we will talk match reports, transfer rumors, top controversies, fantasy football picks, and so much more. So grab a beer and tune in to Football Shortball every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.